Hello and welcome today to Wickham Heights Golf Centre in Buckinghamshire. It gives me great delight to welcome a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Noel Rousseau, today. So Noel was going to share his experiences around the subject of attentional focus. So to be very precise, really the idea between internal and external commands and really how we can use these kind of cues to both help how we move and how we perform. So Noel, welcome today and thank you so much for giving up your time around really explaining how attentional focus fits within both performance as a player and also how it sits within coaching as a golf coach. So maybe as a place to start, would you mind just explaining really what attentional focus is and how we can use it both to improve how we move and also improve how we perform?
Right, okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Mark. Thank you for inviting me on the channel. It's a pleasure to be able to share some of these ideas with you and your audience. I mean, initially, in coaching, we are, of course, delivering information, and we're trying to, change people's movement and help them perform in that way. And of course, as we are delivering information, there's more and more cognitive load. There's more things to think about, and eventually, we have too much to think about. But the way that you deliver the information and the way that you manage that and how you kind of position or help the player position their attention makes a big difference to, as you say, A, how they move and also how well they strike the ball. So having a good understanding of attentional focus, I think, can make a really big difference to your coaching. And in particular, knowing when to use internal or external focus. So let me explain how that came about. It came about 30 years ago, and it's probably the biggest breakthrough in movement science, I would say, in the last 50 years. And it's the work of Professor Gabrielle Wolf. And as a young researcher, she was learning to windsurf. So I think she was in her 20s at the time. And she was getting all these instructions on how to move her body. So I don't know how to windsurf, but it was like, okay, position your knee like so, and your spine has to position this way, and your foot needs to be. And she's doing all this kind of internal dialogue going on about the positioning of her body. And she kept falling in, time after time falling in. I think it was like a 2 or 3 hour windsurfing session. And eventually she just got absolutely fed up. Her mind's full of all these ideas on how to control her body, but she wasn't kind of learning the task at all. So she thought, oh, for goodness sake, there's got to be an easier way. What if I just position the sail, in the right position for the wind and just get on with it and have a go? And immediately she got her first run. So, she managed to go, 50, 100 yards. Breakthrough, fantastic. And then she thought, well, I'll try that again. I'll just kind of forget all that stuff and just position the sail. And then she had a really good first session. Took that back to the lab and had a really good think about it and thought, what was it I actually did differently there that had me actually find my balance, get a good run, and learn to windsurf, as opposed to kind of getting stuck in all these sort of body positions that we as golf coaches, often do, don't we? So she split attention into either internal or external, and has based her whole career on the dichotomy of those two foci. So internal would be when you're thinking about a body part and how it's positioned and angled, etc. Whereas an external focus would be when you're thinking about more about the effects of your movements. So it might be where you want to hit the ball, would be a really distant external focus, thinking about the flag maybe, or probably more useful for coaching, I would say, is the club, and in particular the club head and how you're going to present that to the ball. So that would be an external focus. And as we've seen that has been borne out in the research, is that when you think about how you're going to manipulate the tool, so the task, the body then has this amazing capability to self-organize and coordinate all the other moving parts in the best way possible to deliver, in this case, the club head. So what you're doing in that case is you're trusting your own coordination system to get the job done and find the best way, whereas your focus is just on, in this case, the club head. And as we've seen time and time again, I mean, there's hundreds, there's thousands of papers on this. In external focus has been shown to improve learning, so people learn faster. The retention is better. When they test people, 6 weeks down the line, better under pressure, and it can really help people move differently and kind of break through old movement patterns. It's not, in my opinion, it's not the best thing for all scenarios, and an internal focus has its place. But I think the skill of a coach is to know when to go with deep internal focus and when a more external focus would be preferable. So perhaps you and I in a minute can explore how that might work in an actual golf session.
Yeah, I think that's great. Now, I think for me, certainly when looking more at the sort of the anatomy of movement, you can kind of divide it in two ways, kind of movement awareness versus movement accuracy. So when you look at, say, pain avoidance or injury rehab or more the physiology of movement, typically kind of the movement awareness, how the pelvis and the hip interact, how the spine produces rotation, how the scapula kind of interacts with the wrist and the elbow, for example. That's much more invariably those internal ways of thinking. The real kind of caveat to that can become then when we think very internally, we can often go much slower within our movement, and also we often then lose the movement accuracy. Where's that club face in space as my attention is placed on really how the humeral head and the scapula and the upper ribs kind of interact and move. But then equally so, if it's just about movement accuracy, whereas the club face through space, that can then connect back to slightly disrupted movements around, again, how the scapula moves, how the hip and the pelvis interact, how the feet move. So there's that very kind of diversive approach in a good way that we're looking to improve the awareness of how we move or the accuracy. And I think for me, it just really comes back to the context of the question. We're looking to, say, avoid pain, become more powerful, just improve the actual movement quality we have, or is it just about, say, club delivery and really movement performance?
I think having watched you coach, that's something that you do very well in that, I mean, if you're in a session and you're not clear with the student as to what is the actual goal of the session, then you can easily go the wrong way with this. And you might have thought you've done a great job, but they can't hit it, even though they look to be moving better. And something you always do is you ask the question, what do you want from me today? And set a clear defined goal at the beginning. And if your goal is to really move better and understand some of those kind of deep learned patterns, then you'd go one way. If you want to hit the ball better by the time you finish in this session, that's probably a different kind of lesson, isn't it?
Absolutely. So what Noel will very kindly do now is actually give me a session and really show some very practical examples of really how we can use external commands to really influence how we move, and also some internal commands once more to influence how we move. So as an example, Noel will now guide me through really how we can rotate better in the backswing. So perhaps the question we can explore here would be that if I come to see Noel for a session and I'd really like to improve my backswing rotation, we can look at it both from an internal command. So when we look at things more internally, we can maybe explore kind of where sort of neck rotation is produced. So really through each vertebrae, through each rib, really how we start to kind of move the rib cage, those very internal commands around how the diaphragm moves, how the kind of rib cage moves through kind of lateral flexion and extensions. That'd be very typical examples of kind of very internal commands. What Noel will now give me as an example would be more of an external command that we could use to make it much more intuitive and also much more task-based.
Brilliant, thanks Mark. So typically I think when we're talking about rotating in the backswing, we would normally go internal. I would normally go that way first, but you can draw out that kind of movement by thinking about external and the task. So you'd need to be imaginative. I would say external focus cues need a bit more skill from the coach and a little bit more thinking. But as I say, can really get people moving without getting caught in all this kind of clunky thinking. So okay, let me jump on the mat, Mark. Come step this way if you don't mind. So to draw out a better rotation in the backswing, you might ask somebody to focus on the club head. You might explain the swing as a circle, and guide them to try and make the widest, most, I was going to say stretched out, but that would be internal. Make the widest arc possible with the club head. And of course, one can't make a wide arc if we're not moving our rib cage. That's just not going to happen, is it? So that would in turn invoke some kind of rotation through the pelvis and the rib cage, and keeping their attention on the club head. And you might find they start to move a bit differently. Now, in terms of when to use external or internal focus, I think there's a really clear point where one would be preferable. If you are, as we mentioned a minute ago, if you really are trying to improve how somebody moves anatomically and improve the quality of their movement, then typically internal focus is the way to go. If, however, you're trying to improve how they strike the ball, an internal focus is a long way removed from the task. You know, me thinking about how this kind of hip works this way and how the spine works has really nothing to do with striking a ball, does it? It's not natural, it's not intuitive. And you may find that, well, you would have found as golf coaches, as you work heavily internal with people, their striking can completely, dissipate, and they'll be shanking it and topping it. In which case, I would reassure the student that is kind of expected. I might even explain the Gabrielle Wolf story that often comes up in sessions, and then reassure them that we can fix the strike later. And when it comes to fixing the strike, that's when we go with more an external focus. So for an example, I might have, I did have recently, in fact last week I had a session with a chap. So we had an assessment and he'd been shanking it for a while, and there was some clear movement patterns which would cause that shank. However, I did also explain that he could not shank it in about 3 swings. So we decided to go down the route of cleaning up the movement pattern and actually have him moving better. So in his case, he was really kind of extending the spine and swinging over the top. So we went down that route first, and his movement improved a lot. But he's still shanking it and getting slightly frustrated despite my reassurance. So then we talked about Gabriel Wolf, and then we hit some shots. Thinking more about what happens with the club head. So in that case, I would spray some powder on the face. I would ask him initially just to hit the tee. And I've got a little tee in the ground, enough that he can see exactly where he's striking. And of course, initially, he's striking it all out the heel or out the hosel. And then his task was to hit it more toe side. And without a huge amount of thought, he managed to just improve that awareness of the club head, strike it toe side. Then, of course, we introduced the ball, and we can see the ball is middle to toe side. So he's now got that nice sort of duality of an improved movement, but also improved skill with the club head to deliver it, and he's absolutely over the moon. And I think if we'd have just worked on internal, I think he would have left shanking it and probably not overly satisfied with the session.
So I guess really the moral is you can actually do both simultaneously at the same time in a session. That we really can improve both the awareness of movement through those commands, for example, how the ribs move, how the spine produces rotation, those internal pressures we often get referenced, for example, lows for the ankle, lows for the hip, connections to that shoulder, very common kind of coaching feedback. But done, I think, with the right context, we can improve both the actual movement quality, also alongside the kind of movement accuracy. Really, how well does that club interact with the ball?
Absolutely, and I think there's another thing there. I mean, external focus is amazing. I mean, it's such a breakthrough. And there are, like anything in coaching, there will be people who will say this is the thing that is going to work for everything all the time, and Gabriel Wolf would be of that mindset. I don't see it that way. I see the skill as a coach is to know when to go internal, when to go external, but it's also nice to pass that on to the player. I mean, this chap last week could quite easily see that if he's really deeply thinking about the body, he's probably not going to strike at his best. So he would maybe use external focus more so on the course. Until he's really learnt those movement patterns.
So the approach is not for everybody, but it is for somebody.
And knowing how to manage it. And I wouldn't be shy in passing that onto the student and explaining how it works as well. Now, if you want to take external focus to the next level, I have a challenge for you. Now, I mean, I've got to say, first of all, focus is a skill, isn't it? So I would start most of my sessions with a small mindfulness task where the student sits in a chair and they practice moving their attention around their body. Brilliant for concentration, and it opens up further discussions around psychology, etc. But if you're going to ask people to move their attention, they need to know how to do it. So I'd always start with that. But there's another thing with the research on external focus, which I think is often overlooked, and that is that when we have an internal focus, let's say the task is to kind of improve how one moves around the trail leg. If you gave somebody the internal focus of keep the leg still or keep the femur pointing forwards, they're going to recruit more muscular activity than is necessary as they're really focused on holding the leg. Whereas the research shows that if you actually had a tag that came off the leg and asked them to keep the tag still, then they are far more coordinated in the way that they move, and they have far reduced cognitive effort, so far less mental effort and far less muscular activity to achieve the same task. So the whole thing gets easier, basically. So here's the challenge for you. I mean, here is an example of an external tag to help somebody achieve a better movement pattern. So Mark, I'm just going to stick this on your leg. I mean, I actually bought these. I'm exploring with these, but we'll come back to that. So let's imagine I put this T around your leg here. So rather than the focus being to really kind of hold the leg as he rotates, his challenge is to control the end of the T peg and keep that pointing more forwards. And in exploring that idea, you may find that players move differently to when you ask them to actually hold the leg. So my challenge to you is, can you find different solutions, different interventions where you put tags on people's bodies? So it might be a If you're talking about the head, it might be one of these kids' toys, and ask people to control the end of the antenna rather than actually control the body part. Maybe for rotating the hips, you might do something like that and ask them to move the red antennae kind of behind them through impact. I've literally started exploring this. I would love to hear if anybody has some sort of novel interventions around external tags.
So I think just to kind of maybe demonstrate that, then, so rather than, Noel, for example, through back swing, me actively being aware of how my pelvis moves around the hip joint, kind of how the foot and ankle tracks to the ground, a much more task-based intuitive approach would be that through back swing really allow that T-peg to point more towards the wall through back swing.
Absolutely, and of course the normal pattern is the T would point backwards as the leg kind of gives way and moves that way. So loads to explore, and as I say, the key is to kind of grow with it, try things out, and know how to manage internal or external focus.